The Harcourt Hill campus was in use from October 1959 and officially opened by the Minister of Education on the 21st of May 1960. The Westminster College story, however, starts some 122 years before this. In 1838, the Wesleyan Methodist Education Committee, or WMEC, was founded, and the church started funding teacher training students to attend the Free Church College in Glasgow, now part of the University of Strathclyde. On the 7th of October 1851, the committee opened its first college, the Wesleyan Normal Institution. It was housed at 130 Horseferry Road in the city of Westminster, and had a view which included Queen Elizabeth Tower and Big Ben over its rear quad. Life and learning was situated around a series of college quads, and patriotic VR, Victoria Regina bosses, were mounted around the principal's quadrangle. The buildings were described as being in a style which suggested the late medieval buildings of the older universities in Oxford and Cambridge. They featured a frontage of 3 gables divided by massive buttresses, each gable having an enriched oriel window 2 stories in height, with opened traceried parapet, and the angles terminated with gargoyle heads. The Illustrated London News of the 8th of February 1851 also noted that the central quad housed a lofty tower and projecting wings 80 feet in height, with an embrasured parapet and an enriched oriel window. Other areas of college were handsome, richly decorated, and spacious. A student in the 1950s reported that the college blended its Methodist ethos with its educational purpose, stating that on his left, as he placed a proprietorial hand on the moulded joint of the arch, was the chapel for spiritual. On his right, the dining hall for temporal sustenance. The 1851 buildings included bedrooms and dining hall, reading room, and infant schools. Spaces for men and women were separated, as were the subjects they could study. The college was relatively unusual, however, in operating as a co-educational institution. In 1872, following the 1870 Act of Education Act, which established the principle of free provision of elementary education for all children aged between 5 and 13, as well as establishing local education boards, the WMEC established a second college, Southlands, at Battersea, and separated the students by gender. At a managerial level, however, the colleges continued to operate as effectively one institution. Sticking with Westminster, the college buildings were first modified in the early 1900s, with the introduction of electricity, modification of their plumbing system, and extension of teaching spaces, with the addition of specialist science labs and the college's first on-site chapel. This work saw the removal of the practicing schools and was funded by the 20th Century Fund. This fund sought to raise 1 guinea from each of the 500,000 WM, or Wesleyan Methodist members, and had wide-reaching aims. These aims included a new membership drive, support for home and overseas missions, and NCH, or the National Children's Home, and the building of what became Westminster Central Hall, a visible and monumental memorial to the Methodist movement and people. It allocated £70,751 to Methodist educational causes, of which £38,000 went to the expansion of Westminster and Southlands colleges, and the relocation of Westminster's practicing schools. In 1910, the college's east window, familiar to all who've studied at Westminster College or on Harcourt Hill, was installed as a memorial to the Reverend David Waller, the long-serving Methodist Education Secretary. In 1921, the first college memorial to war was installed, commemorating the 102 Westminsterians who were killed during the First World War. They were soon joined by a brass plaque which recorded the college's use as the headquarters for the Australian Imperial Forces, and then by a memorial organ that was added in 1928 and had been funded by students. It grew after the First World War, with the purchase of sports pitches at Tooting. In 1926, they considered moving to Hull, encouraged by Methodist leader and local figure Sir Thomas Ferrens. Hull was believed to be too far north and unlikely to be of sufficient attractiveness to recruit students. In 1928, they considered relocation to Leicester, a university college also validated by the University of London, but lacking its own school of pedagogy. The transfer of 3 college staff to the university staff was agreed, as was a seat on university convocation for the college principal. They even agreed the design for the college's prospectus, replacing the logo of the WMEC with that of the university. Despite this level of planning, the National Board of Education blocked this relocation, with the hope that the university college would establish its own teacher training centre. In return for doing this, the government worked with Westminster College to establish the Westminster Experiment. This was a 3-year Bachelor of Arts or Science degree at one of the university colleges in London, followed by a 1-year teacher training certificate at Westminster. This scheme lasted until the college relocated to Oxford in 1959 and is the reason for Westminster College's disparate evacuation during the Second World War, with students sent to Aberystwyth, Bangor or Cambridge, and 4th-year teacher training students sent to Bristol. Saw fewer deaths during the Second World War, with 46 students and alumni killed. Its buildings were utilised by the City of Westminster Council, the Ministry of Works, and the Fire Service, with fire equipment stored at Westminster College in case of threat by fire or bombing to the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, and other large-scale buildings. On the night of 4th-5th March 1944, over 300 incendiary bombs were dropped on the college, destroying its chapel, dining hall, and principal's house. Despite this, the college reopened in October 1945, with one student describing how they had to step around bomb craters in the front quad, the boarded over windows, and the use of an air raid bell in place of a college bell. The buildings were fully repaired by 1948 and supplemented with a new sports pavilion and pitches at Elmstead Wood in Kent, a site intended to serve as the new college campus. In 1951, it celebrated its centenary with a visit from the then Princess Elizabeth. In 1953, the college received a damning inspection from the government. The rooms were described as small and worn down, the library disordered, and a lack of sports pitches on site was a disadvantage for educational training. In November of that year, the MEC's secretary telephoned college principal H. Trevor Hughes. Hughes later recorded their exchange. He noted that it was one evening in November that Mr. J. A. Knowles, the financial secretary of the Methodist Education Committee, telephoned. "Prepare yourself for a shock," he said. "What about moving the college to Oxford?" He asked me to produce objections. I could think of none. In order to remove the college to Oxford, its Board of Trustees established a series of aims. Were established in their proposal for the relocation of Westminster College, dated 31st March 1954. The college should be transferred to Oxford, provided that permission is obtained from the University of Oxford and a site secured within the university area, it said. The third aim was established slightly later, to secure a validatory relationship with the University of Oxford that was, at a minimum, as beneficial as the relationship between Westminster College and the University of London. The incoming Vice-Chancellor of the University and the current Warden of New College suggested that Westminster College look to purchase land on Harcourt Hill, a site he claimed provided easy access to the city centre, which was supposedly only a 15-minute journey away. This land was purchased in March 1955, a purchase that was followed by a short battle with local planning authorities on the grounds that it impacted the supposed green belt. Unfinished, the college moved to Harcourt Hill over the summer in 1959, opening in that October. As can be seen in this photograph, students later recalled that it was like Moses splitting the Red Sea. Almost immediately, however, the college was asked to increase the number of students it could take, doubling from 200 to over 400. This offer, however, was accompanied by an offer of more funding from the Ministry of Education. So, naturally, the college agreed. The expansion of buildings led to a second quad of student halls. The expansion of the college chapel by 2 bays, with it initially finishing where the stairs and smaller stained glass windows are today. And the doubling of the dining hall, which initially finished where the seating booths now are. Over the decades, validatory bodies changed, moving from the University of Oxford to the Council for National Academic Awards, then back to the University of Oxford in the 1990s. The Open University and University of Warwick also validated programs for a time. Female students were reintroduced in 1959-60 to coincide with the college's relocation to Oxford, and bachelor degrees were offered in 1969. Further estate adaptations included the construction of a swimming pool, the addition of a dedicated library building rather than one under the chapel, the sealing in of the corridor between the chapel and dining hall, which was done in the 1980s or 90s, and most recently the construction of the new Westminster Halls, which were built by Oxford Brookes and opened in 2012. It even, controversially, gained a bar. Religious special collections, including the G.K. Chesterton Library, the Alister Hardy Religious Experience Centre, and the Wesley Historical Society Library, were all based at the college for a time, leading to the establishment of a dedicated Wesley Centre, later known as the Oxford Centre for Methodism and Church History. In the mid-1990s, following the 1992 Act, which enabled polytechnics and HE colleges to become universities, applications to Westminster dropped significantly. Between 1994 and 96, it applied to become an integrated college of the University of Oxford. They were told, however, the process would take several months and might result in refusal. In the face of this uncertainty and sector instability, Westminster College formed a deal with Oxford Brookes University. In the summer of 2000, the two institutions, both of which were struggling to successfully recruit trainee teachers, formally merged and opened as the Westminster Institute of Education the following September. It is worth noting here that the Oxford Brookes School of Education was itself the product of a merger between Lady Spencer Churchill College, formerly Bletchley Park Training College, which had been established as the last emergency training college in 1948, and Oxford Polytechnic. This merger took place following the rearranging of county boundaries and was formalised in 1975. Westminster Institute of Education closed in 2012, and theology ceased to be taught in 2017. In 2024, the Oxford Centre for Methodism and Church History closed, each of which signalled a weakening of the Methodist educational ethos at Harcourt Hill. We now mark the end of teacher training here, a move which further weakens the college's legacy. Despite this, a new research space at Wesley Memorial Church and the establishment of the Westminster Oxford Research Network signals some hope for Methodist higher education and the Westminster legacy. Is not just an institution or a series of buildings. It is also its students and its staff, and it would be remiss of me to not mention just a few of them. Sarah Goebel was one of the first women to qualify for the government teaching certificate. She was later the first infants teacher at Westminster College. Sir James Yoxall trained at Westminster College and was later a Member of Parliament for Nottingham. Ronald Gould was a leading trade unionist, leading the National Union of Teachers through the 1944 Education Act. Ralph Waller became a Methodist minister and returned to the college as its chaplain. He later led Manchester College in Oxford through its admission as a college of the university, and is now chair of the Westminster College Oxford Trust. Bev Clack studied at Westminster before working at its sister college, Southlands. She later became a professor at Oxford Brookes University and is now one of the Westminster Research Fellows in Oxford. Finally, John May trained for his PGCE at the college in the 1980s. He later became the CEO of Cats Protection and the Chief Commissioner for Scouts in the UK. He is this year the High Sheriff of Oxfordshire. Monwar Hussain, the 2021 High Sheriff and Islamic chaplain at Eton, is also an Old Westminsterian. Other OWs or Old Westminsterians include two recipients of the Victoria Cross, William Forshaw and Donald Simpson Bell. John Bridge, who's one of only two men to have received the George Cross, George Medal and Bar. Thousands and thousands of teachers, as well as one of my own primary teachers. Its staff included John Scott, a leading 19th century Methodist theologian and educationalist, James Smetham, a pre-Raphaelite artist, an associate, Philip Morris, later Director General of Army Education, and then a Vice-Chancellor of the University of Bristol, and Lewis Fry Richardson, a Quaker statistician whose work on the mathematics behind warfare is still the go-to work on this subject. Finally, I'd like to note one of the college's English lecturers. It was here, at a Methodist college on the edge of Oxfordshire, overlooking the city, that Philip Pullman drafted Northern Lights, arguably one of the best-known children's books of the late 20th century. Westminster College was a teacher training institution, which operated between 1851 and 2000, and was followed by another 25 years of teacher training as an integral part of OBU. We've now celebrated 70 years of teacher training occupation at Harcourt Hill, a legacy that will continue to impact many around the world for many years to come. Overall, this legacy of over 150 years of education continues to impact us today. Indeed, all who've studied and worked at Westminster College or Harcourt Hill have been impacted by the college's ethos and spirit of teaching excellence, research support, and a place in one large collegiate family.